Hey there, welcome to Sleepy History Secrets, the channel where history gets strange but the voice stays calm. Tonight we'll wander through the long, winding story of a leaf that once carried prayers up a mountain, and later carried empires down from their pedestals. This is the complete history of cocaine, the tale of how a sacred plant became a global engine of wealth, war, and regret. Before you get comfortable, take a quiet moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy falling asleep to humanity's bad decisions. And when you're ready, leave a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is right now. It's oddly comforting to know how many of us are awake at the wrong hour, each in our own little corner of history. Now dim the lights. Maybe let a soft hum of white noise fill the background, the sort that sounds like a faraway river, and let's begin our slow journey, tracing a single leaf's transformation from sacred ritual to industrial addiction. If your mind drifts, that's perfectly fine. We'll still be here, quietly unfolding the story. You begin high in the Andes. The air's thin enough to make your heartbeat sound like footsteps echoing inside your skull. Every breath feels borrowed, and the sun cuts the mountains into glass. This is where coca grows, small, green, unassuming. The plant that quietly sustained one of the world's highest civilizations. To chew coca is to make a bargain with the mountain. The leaf numbs your tongue, dulls hunger, softens the edge of fatigue. It doesn't intoxicate, it equalizes. For the Quechua and Aymara people, it was not an indulgence but a dialogue, a sacred conversation between body and earth. You didn't eat coca to feel strong, you chewed it to remind yourself you were still part of the mountain's breath. In the Inca world, coca was controlled as tightly as gold. The state rationed it, taxed it, and distributed it to workers like divine payroll. Farmers tending terraces 1,000 meters above comfort lines tucked the leaves into their cheeks as calmly as modern workers sip coffee. Priests offered coca in rituals to ensure the sun would keep rising, the fields keep producing, and the rulers keep ruling. In those moments, empire was literally in the people's mouths. It's strange, isn't it? Something so small, so gentle, already carrying the blueprint for obsession. Coca didn't demand devotion, it inspired it. And that's usually how history starts to misbehave. When the Spaniards arrived, they didn't understand any of this. To them, coca was heathen nonsense, a habit of pagans who clearly didn't know proper religion or proper hygiene. Early priests called it the devil's leaf. It didn't take long, however, for the empire to notice something inconvenient. Miners working without coca were collapsing faster than profit could replace them. At the great silver mine of Potosi, 10,000 feet above Mercy, coca suddenly became holy again, not to save souls but to save productivity. The crown that once condemned it now shipped tons of it, because theology rarely wins an argument with economics. Picture the scene: colonial warehouses filled with baskets of leaves, each bundle stamped and taxed, blessed by priests who crossed themselves between ledgers. A sacred plant turned into an entry in an inventory list. Miners chewed their daily quota, praying to the Virgin and the mountain in the same breath, unsure which one was listening. Coca, once the symbol of cosmic balance, had become caffeine for an empire that believed itself eternal. Even then, Europeans didn't quite know what they had found. Reports trickled back to Madrid describing a leaf that kept labourers working beyond the natural strength of man. Imagine that phrase echoing in the mind of a chemist centuries later. Beyond the natural strength of man. That's not a moral warning, that's an invitation. The future of cocaine began not in a lab, but in those ledgers, where the miracle of endurance was measured in silver weight. You can almost smell the story forming, a faint bitterness like dried tea, the sweat of miners, the candle smoke of colonial chapels. The Andes watched it all without comment, knowing how mountains do, that everything extracted must eventually be paid for. Centuries later, people would claim the plant caused addiction, violence, and moral decay. But the mountain might whisper back, "You were the ones who taught the leaf what greed looks like." Some legends say that the coca plant was born from the burial of a woman who had been both desired and despised, her spirit divided, her body reborn as green leaves to heal the people who once shunned her. It's an old Andean myth, but it fits strangely well. Because every time humanity worships and exploits the same thing, a woman somewhere in history gets turned into a resource. That pattern never really stopped. It just found new laboratories. For now, though, the leaf remains innocent. It lies drying in the sun, waiting for the next civilization to decide what it's worth. The Inca will fall, the Spaniards will leave, and someone else, in a white coat instead of armour, will look at the same leaf and think, what if we could bottle this? And thus quietly the sacred mountain begins to chew back. You wake up to the sound of bells echoing across stone courtyards. It's morning in the new world of conquest, and the air smells like wet iron and incense. The priests have arrived, sleeves rolled, eyes sharp, determined to scrub the Andes clean of its old gods. They find the people chewing green leaves, whispering to the mountains, and they frown as if witnessing a sin they can't yet name. The Spanish crown calls coca a superstition, a weed of idolaters. For a moment it seems the leaf's long conversation with humanity will finally go silent. But the empire discovers something awkward. Its labourers don't last long without it. The mines of Potosi rise 12,000 feet into the sky, a city of silver carved into despair. At that altitude, oxygen becomes a rumour. The men working there collapse, choke, or simply never wake up again. Yet those who chew coca manage to endure. Their cheeks are swollen with leaves, their lips green and numb, their eyes open long past exhaustion. The Spanish overseers notice this and quickly forget theology. They allow, then encourage, then enforce the habit they once condemned. Faith is replaced with productivity reports. Before long, coca becomes a colonial business. Merchants haul baskets of it up narrow roads. Soldiers escort the caravans as if guarding royal treasure. Every leaf is weighed, counted, taxed. The church adjusts its sermon. If the Indians must chew, let it be for the glory of the Lord. Priests sprinkle holy water over sacks of coca before sending them to the mines. The mountain doesn't mind. It has seen this trick before. The way belief changes costumes but keeps the same hunger underneath. In those tunnels, lit only by candles and desperation, the miners whisper two prayers, one to the Virgin Mary and one to the spirits of the mountain. They don't see a conflict. They need both on their side. And somewhere between the Ave Maria and the Andean chant, the leaf becomes bilingual. It speaks the language of empire now. It has learned how to survive inside ledgers. Outside, in the plazas of Cusco and Lima, coca takes on another identity. Spanish administrators chew it discreetly, pretending not to enjoy it. The same leaf they once called evil now makes its quiet debut in colonial drawing rooms, slipped into wine like a secret handshake. No one writes this part down. History prefers its hypocrisy neat. Even in Europe, rumours begin to circulate. Stories of a miraculous plant from the Andes that banishes fatigue, hunger and pain. The tone is half scientific curiosity, half marketing pitch. Scholars speculate that perhaps the Indians had stumbled upon nature's perfect stimulant. Missionaries write home, claiming that with proper Christian oversight, coca could become a gift from God. It is always amusing how easily gifts from God find their way into cargo holds. Ships sail for Spain with holds full of silver and side compartments of coca. The crown counts both by weight, unaware that the second cargo will one day outweigh the first in damage. In Seville, doctors dabble with the dried leaves, unsure what to do with them. Without altitude and ritual, coca tastes like nothing, the flavour of a ghost missing its mountain. For now, Europe shrugs. It files coca away under curiosities, next to shrunken heads and exotic feathers. But ideas, like seeds, travel better than people expect. Back in the Andes, coca is now law. Every miner receives a ration. The empire has learned to monetize endurance. And Potosi, over 8 million souls will pass through the tunnels during 3 centuries of extraction. Most will die young, but the silver keeps coming, and so does the coca. If you want to understand how global trade begins, look at those mines. One half human suffering, the other half chemical assistance. Coca's sacred meaning is fading fast. By the late 1600s, colonial documents describe it purely in economic terms. The commodity most useful for sustaining Indian labour. It's no longer an offering to Pachamama, the Earth Mother. It's an offering to payroll. A plant that once symbolised balance now props up imbalance so vast it becomes invisible. If you were to listen closely at night, when the wind sweeps across the shafts, you might imagine the leaves whispering in protest. But history doesn't listen well, especially when the noise of coinage is louder. Centuries pass. Empires change flags. The mines slow, the trade cools, and the leaf returns to quiet corners. Villagers still chew it at sunrise, just as they always did. In the cool, thin air, it still tastes faintly of sunlight filtered through stone. But far away, in European cities humming with new machines and electric ambition, scientists begin to read old travel diaries. They find footnotes about a plant that gives extraordinary vigour. Someone decides to investigate. It is the 1800s now, and chemistry is the century's new religion. Anything can be refined, purified, perfected. Inside a German laboratory, a young chemist named Albert Niemann will soon grind the dried leaves and dissolve them in acids, chasing the ghost of the mountain through glassware and bubbling flasks. He doesn't believe in spirits or gods, only in formulas that end neatly with equal signs. But the story's about to teach him what the priests already learned. Everything sacred can be commodified, and every miracle can be mass-produced. The mountains remain silent. They've seen this before. The moment when curiosity mistakes itself for control, somewhere between Potosi's fading mines and a European laboratory waiting to gleam with new discovery. Coca begins its next transformation. The leaf that once fueled prayer and labour is about to be reborn as something colder, whiter, and infinitely more profitable. The world is preparing for its first true line of modern ambition, and it won't be measured in silver anymore. The century turns quietly, as centuries often do. By now, the Spanish Empire has perfected the art of repackaging sin as commerce. Coca, once a sacred breath between people and their mountains, is now just another line in an account book. In the ledgers of Lima and Potosi, the leaf sits comfortably between silver ore and tallow candles. Even faith is itemized. The priests still bless the shipments, though no one is quite sure if they are sanctifying the workers or the profit margins. In colonial records, the word soul appears less and less, while yield appears more and more. Caravans climb narrow roads between cliffs that feel too close to the sky. Mules strain under loads of silver ingots and baskets of dried green leaves. The wind smells of metal and sweat and crushed vegetation. Every bend in the road feels like a confession the Empire doesn't want to make. By the time the caravans reach the coast, the leaves are brown and brittle, yet still valuable, the taste of endurance, flattened for export. They sail across the Atlantic, tucked beside silver and sugar, the 3 currencies of empire: metal, sweetness, and stamina. Back in Spain, curiosity begins to replace condemnation. The scientists of the Enlightenment start asking polite questions. What is this Indian leaf that sustains such labour? Is it a charm, a medicine, a lie? Specimens arrive in jars labelled with exotic handwriting. European scholars sniff the leaves, grind them, brew them, write about them. They taste faint bitterness and disappointment. Whatever made the Andean miners endure doesn't survive the voyage. Without altitude, ritual, and belief, the leaf is just a shadow of itself. Europe shrugs again. But ideas, like ships, leave their wake behind. In the colonies, coca continues its quiet work. The Inca are gone, but their habits remain. Families still chew leaves before planting, travelling or praying. Farmers offer the first handful of coca to the earth before keeping the rest for themselves. They call it feeding the mountain. To the Spanish overseers, it's just a charming superstition. They take notes, never realising they are documenting one of the most enduring forms of cultural resistance. Because to chew coca is to refuse erasure. Every mouthful says, "We are still here, no matter what name you write on the map." Over time, the trade system grows more elaborate. Licenses are issued, storage depots built. Coca's value rises and falls with the price of silver, like two lungs breathing the same empire. Planters bribe officials to keep their fields untouched during tax seasons. Merchants water down the leaves with dried grass to cheat the scales. Corruption becomes as natural as the wind. If history were a body, greed would be its heartbeat. Meanwhile, in Europe, the industrial age begins to hum. Steam replaces sails, glass replaces parchment, and science replaces prayer. Somewhere in this new world of inventions, coca's next chapter is quietly waiting. A few curious doctors still keep samples in their cabinets, though most regard them as curiosities, a relic of exotic superstition. Then a letter from Peru arrives at the French Academy of Sciences, describing coca's extraordinary power to restore vitality. A handful of chemists raise their eyebrows. The race to decode the leaf begins again, only this time in laboratories instead of temples. You can imagine the first experiments: glass flasks, brass instruments, and the smell of something sharp and sweet rising from a burner. The scientist leans over the table trying to isolate the invisible. He's not seeking gods, only data, but that distinction will soon blur. He dissolves crushed leaves in alcohol, filters the liquid, evaporates the residue. No strange symbols needed here, just patience, fire, and curiosity. And somewhere in the mixture, under layers of chemistry and chance, something new appears, a glimmer of pure white crystals. He notes their shape, their sparkle, their almost arrogant purity. He doesn't yet know what he's holding, only that it feels important. Back in South America, the mountains keep their calm. The farmers still chew. They have no idea that the same leaf they've known for centuries has just been reborn as a laboratory curiosity in Europe. History has an odd sense of humour. It waits for ordinary people to carry on as usual while it quietly rearranges their future behind their backs. By the mid-1800s, coca's reputation has split in two. In the Andes, it's still an everyday tool of endurance and ceremony. In Europe, it's now a question mark, a potential miracle wrapped in mystery. The same leaf that once fueled colonial minds will soon fuel scientific ambition. Empires no longer dig for silver, they dig for explanations. And what they're about to find will change the world more deeply than all the gold of Potosi ever did. Imagine the irony. The same cargo ships that once carried chained people and holy relics will now ferry boxes of dried leaves, sailing toward laboratories where men in spectacles believe they are purifying nature. They'll call it discovery. The mountains will call it déjà vu. As the 19th century dawns, the story of coca is ready to leave its birthplace for good. The plant that once linked people to the sacred will soon link continents through commerce. And in a modest German laboratory, one with creaky floors, flickering gas lamps, and a chemist named Albert Niemann, the ghost of the Andes is about to reveal its final secret. The leaf has learned to survive every empire so far. Now it will learn to survive without the mountain altogether. You find yourself standing inside a German laboratory, somewhere in the year 1860. It smells of spirits and soot, that particular perfume made of alcohol fumes, metal clamps, and ambition. Beakers glint faintly in the weak daylight. A young chemist named Albert Niemann leans over his desk, grinding dried coca leaves into a pale green dust. He has never seen the Andes, never felt the mountain wind that birthed this leaf, but he has read about it, a plant said to banish hunger and exhaustion, to make men feel limitless. That sort of claim is irresistible to someone who believes that science can capture miracles in a jar. He mixes the powder with acid, lets it bubble and cool, filters it, and watches a residue appear. Thin, clear, crystalline. He touches the edge of one flake to his tongue and feels his mouth go numb as if a ghost had brushed past. It's not magic, he assures himself. It's chemistry, the language of cause and effect. And yet, in that moment, something invisible has stepped out of the mountains and into the modern world. He names the substance cocaine, a simple title for a complicated future. When Niemann publishes his results, the scientific world applauds politely. A new alkaloid, they call it, one of many discoveries of the age. But even then, the tone of the reports carries a quiet thrill. A compound that sharpens focus, deadens pain, and makes the heart race with efficient certainty. It sounds like progress in powdered form. The 19th century is hungry for such things. Factories roar, trains shriek, cities grow faster than their own shadows. No one wants to rest. Everyone wants to stay awake just a little longer. Cocaine enters medicine as a curiosity. Doctors test it on themselves because that was the fashion of the time. The belief that a true scientist must first become his own experiment. They discover that it can numb tissue so completely that minor surgery becomes painless. One physician notes that a few drops on the eye allow the scalpel to glide without agony. A miracle, he says. Patients agree. Surgeons can now operate in the open light instead of the shadow of screams. Of course, every miracle comes with a fine print. A numb tongue, a quickened pulse, a mind that refuses to slow down after the work is done. Some notice the restlessness, others don't care. This is the century that builds engines and theories of evolution. No one has time for subtle warnings. Across Europe, patent medicine makers sense opportunity. Bottles of nerve tonic and restorative elixir begin to appear in shop windows. They promise energy, confidence, relief. They sell especially well in Paris, where fatigue and glamour live side by side. One French pharmacist, Angelo Mariani, creates a fortified wine infused with coca extract. He names it Vin Mariani, and it becomes the drink of poets, politicians, even the Pope. Mariani advertises it with portraits of famous admirers and testimonials written in handwriting that looks suspiciously similar to his own. The public drinks it, feels awake, and calls it civilization in a bottle. Across the Atlantic, an American pharmacist notices this success and decides to make his own version. He adds a bit of cola nut for caffeine, some sugar, some fizz, and a discreet measure of coca extract. He calls it a tonic for fatigue, not a drug. Within a few decades, his creation will be sold on every street corner. Later, after the ingredient list becomes awkward to explain, the company will quietly remove the cocaine but keep the name. Even now, a single US factory imports legal coca leaves, strips them of their active alkaloid, and sells the flavour to the famous beverage company. The extracted drug goes to pharmaceutical use. The irony still fizzes quietly under the cap. Meanwhile, a young Viennese doctor named Sigmund Freud becomes fascinated by cocaine. He reads Niemann's papers, buys a small supply, and begins his own experiments. He takes a dose and writes that he feels a certain elation and lightness. He gives it to friends, to patients, even to his fiancée, promising that it will cure melancholy, stomach pain, and fatigue. For a while, it seems he's right. His patients smile again. He feels unstoppable. He even writes a paper calling it a magical substance. But soon, one of his closest colleagues becomes dependent on it and collapses into psychosis. Freud stops writing about cocaine after that. He will later found the theory of psychoanalysis, but the drug that once opened his mind will haunt it quietly in the background. In hospitals, surgeons praise the anesthetic power of the drug. In parlours, the same compound becomes a secret thrill. Pharmacies sell cocaine powder in neat little vials, advertised as a cure for toothache, depression and shyness. Postcards from the era show mothers smiling as they buy cocaine drops for infants. No one yet calls it an epidemic, it's simply modernity. Clean, efficient, slightly euphoric. Cocaine has finally left the mountain completely. It no longer needs altitude, ritual or permission. It can be bottled, mailed and prescribed. It travels faster than rumour, slips past conscience, and nestles comfortably beside morphine and chloroform on medical shelves. The line between medicine and temptation has become so fine that most people can't see it anymore. That's the thing about progress. When it finally catches up to desire, nobody wants to stop running. By the end of the 19th century, cocaine is everywhere, in drinks, wines, cigarettes, toothache powders, and fashionable parties. Doctors praise it, artists adore it, and businessmen depend on it. The world has learned to monetize alertness, and once you can sell alertness, you can sell anything. But quietly, beneath the bright advertisements and polite optimism, small warnings begin to surface. Letters from physicians describing patients who cannot sleep, whose hearts tremble with invisible thunder. The symptoms are easy to ignore. After all, the age of miracles is busy congratulating itself. Outside the lab windows, smoke rises from factories like incense for a new god, the god of production. And somewhere between the glassware and the city skyline, humanity begins to forget the difference between improvement and excess. The mountain's leaf has become pure chemistry now, and chemistry, like ambition, doesn't pray. It simply continues to react. The year is somewhere around 1884, and the world is beginning to mistake exhaustion for sophistication. Electric light flickers through European cities, factories hum through the night, and no one wants to slow down long enough to notice how tired they are. It's the perfect moment for a substance that promises endless energy, a powder that makes the century feel invincible. You can imagine Sigmund Freud at his desk in Vienna, a neat pile of papers beside a small bottle of white crystals. He dips the tip of his finger, tastes it, waits. A soft rush blooms behind his eyes, the kind that makes ordinary ideas feel revolutionary. His fatigue fades, his thoughts sharpen. He calls it a wonderful stimulant and writes letter after letter about its potential for depression, for anxiety, for nearly everything that makes being human inconvenient. He sends some to his friends, to his fiancée, even to colleagues who could publish his findings faster. He recommends it for morphine addicts, reasoning that one addiction might gently replace another. History has an unkind sense of humour about such logic. Freud's enthusiasm is both scientific and personal. He believes that within this new chemical lies proof that the mind can be tuned like an instrument, adjusted, refined, perfected. For a short while, he feels unstoppable. Ideas flow. He drafts papers that will later become the early foundations of psychoanalysis. But under the glow of his own optimism, a darker truth is already forming. The same brilliance that helps him understand the mind is what blinds him to its fragility. At the same time, in an operating theatre in Vienna General Hospital, another young doctor named Karl Koller is about to change medicine in a quieter but far more lasting way. He is experimenting with eye surgery and has been searching for a way to numb the cornea. A friend mentions Freud's recent fascination with cocaine. Koller tests it. He dips a swab into a weak solution and touches it to a rabbit's eye. The animal doesn't flinch. He blinks, realizes what he's discovered, and repeats the experiment on himself. The result is the first local anesthesia in medical history, a simple chemical moment that would spare humanity centuries of pain. For surgeons, it is a revelation. The age of screaming patients ends. The age of controlled precision begins. Hospitals celebrate. Freud is delighted at first. He calls it proof that his miracle substance has moral value, a scientific redemption. But fame moves in mysterious ways. Koller becomes known as the father of ocular anesthesia. Freud's name begins to fade from this particular story. When cocaine's darker side emerges, he will pretend the whole affair was a passing curiosity. Outside the hospitals, the miracle multiplies. Pharmacies sell cocaine in powdered packets, available without prescription. Newspapers advertise it as a cure for indigestion, fatigue, and shyness. Manufacturers release cocaine toothache drops for children. No one questions it. If doctors use it, it must be civilized. Even exhaustion becomes fashionable. People don't want to rest, they want to recover faster. Society learns to call recovery progress. In France, the chemist Angelo Mariani perfects his tonic wine, red Bordeaux infused with coca extract. He calls it Vin Mariani and markets it with charming audacity. Each bottle bears endorsements from writers, actors, and even the Pope himself. Mariani sends crates to influential figures, knowing that flattery is the world's cheapest ingredient. Artists drink it, claiming divine inspiration. Politicians sip it before speeches, feeling freshly enlightened. One journalist describes it as sunshine in liquid form. He is not entirely wrong. It is sunshine condensed into a bottle, with all the burns to follow. Across the ocean, American entrepreneurs take notes. An Atlanta pharmacist named John Pemberton, wounded in the Civil War and addicted to morphine, decides to create his own pick-me-up. He combines coca extract with cola nut, sugar syrup and soda water. He calls it a brain tonic. It's sweet, fizzy, and perfectly legal. People drink it to focus, to socialize, to survive Monday. He names it Coca-Cola. By the time the recipe changes and the cocaine is quietly removed, the name itself has already built an empire. Even today, a single factory in New Jersey imports legal coca leaves, removes the active compound for medical use, and sells the flavour to that same company. It is perhaps the only instance in history where a global corporation's secret ingredient is technically supervised by the government. A strange peace treaty between commerce and chemistry. Everywhere, the language of medicine begins to blur into the language of marketing. Advertisements speak in the tone of scientific revelation, restores vitality, invigorates the mind, banishes fatigue. There are powders for writers, syrups for mothers, cigars for the well-to-do. Cocaine is no longer a discovery, it's a lifestyle. Doctors prescribe it to the tired and the wealthy, which at that time are often the same people. It becomes the signature of the new century, bright-eyed, restless, sleepless. And yet, the cracks begin to show. A few physicians write letters to medical journals warning of excessive stimulation and mental disturbance. Some users report strange visions, heart palpitations, days without sleep. But progress never likes to hear criticism from those who are no longer keeping up. For every cautionary voice, there are 10 advertisements promising deliverance. The market always wins the argument, until the bodies start to disagree. Freud watches from Vienna as reports of addiction begin to appear. He publishes no more essays about the substance. Instead, he turns his attention inward, studying dreams, repression and guilt, as if to atone through theory what chemistry had made too literal. He will live long enough to see cocaine fall from grace, and to realize that even intellectual giants can leave their fingerprints on disasters. By the close of the 19th century, cocaine has become both miracle and menace. It anesthetizes the world, numbs its pain, and whispers that it can be better, faster, sharper, cleaner. It is modernity in crystal form, and as always, humanity confuses speed with progress. The next century will inherit that misunderstanding and make it industrial. For now, the white powder sits on every pharmacist's shelf, glowing faintly under a gaslight. The age of tonic miracles has arrived, and nobody has yet learned the word addiction. Not because it doesn't exist, but because it hasn't needed to. You wake up in the early years of the new century. The lamps burn late, the trains never stop, and the newspapers are hungry. Every headline demands something sensational, preferably involving vice, science, or fear. And cocaine, unfortunately, offers all three. At first, it's a whisper. Doctors begin to notice patients who cannot sleep, who talk too fast, who tremble when they try to stop. They call it nervous exhaustion, because that sounds more polite than what it really is: dependence. Soon the stories reach the press and the whisper becomes an orchestra. Articles warn of cocaine fiends, their language trembling with moral panic and a convenient lack of evidence. Illustrations show wide-eyed figures in alleys, their hands shaking, their skin pale. Most of these stories are exaggerated, some are simply invented. But once fear becomes entertaining, it rarely needs facts. Cocaine, once a symbol of modern elegance, is now recast as the enemy of civilization. The tone changes overnight. The same publications that once called it a miracle now call it a menace. The cycle is familiar. First we worship, then we condemn, then we pretend the two are different acts. In the American South, newspapers begin to link cocaine to racial panic. Writers claim that Negroes under the influence of the drug become violent and immune to bullets. It's nonsense, of course, but in an age already fueled by segregation and fear, nonsense can feel persuasive. Politicians read those headlines, nod gravely, and begin to draft laws. Not because of science, but because fear always writes faster than evidence. In a few short years, the public's curiosity turns into policy, and once moral judgment enters the laboratory, no experiment is ever purely scientific again. In the cities, the effects are quieter, but more real. Behind pharmacy counters, some customers return again and again, pale and desperate. Doctors begin to notice the pattern: trembling hands, sleepless nights, hearts that refuse to slow down. One physician calls it a mind that forgets where the brake is. It's a perfect description, because the substance doesn't just accelerate the body, it erases the ability to stop. Dependence begins politely, almost invisibly. A spoonful in a tonic, a powder prescribed for fatigue, then a little more, because the patient feels wonderful and wants to stay that way. Soon, the glow turns to a glare, and the glare turns to paranoia. The same clarity that once made the world sparkle now makes every shadow look suspicious. There are letters from patients describing hearing whispers that aren't there, seeing lights that never flicker. Doctors blame weak nerves. The truth is simpler, a chemical conversation that has gone on too long. As addiction grows, society searches for villains. It rarely chooses the right ones. Instead of blaming the manufacturers or the pharmacists, it blames the poor, the foreign, and the visible. People of colour, immigrants, musicians, anyone already accused of something else. A moral narrative forms. Drugs belong to the underworld, and anyone using them must already be lost. It's easier that way. If sin has a face, you don't have to see your own reflection. Meanwhile, the governments begin to take notes. Reformers demand order, clergy call for purity, and politicians, always eager for applause, promise to cleanse the nation's veins. Medical associations issue statements warning of degeneracy. Public speakers describe cocaine as a new plague, though plagues usually require less paperwork. The same chemical that anesthetized patients now anesthetizes consciences. Nobody asks how the miracle became a monster. The public, reassured by authority, learns to moralize what it once consumed. Pharmacists quietly move their cocaine stock to the back room. Manufacturers rename their tonics. Bottles disappear from windows. In their place appear pamphlets with stern titles, The Menace of the White Powder. The irony goes unnoticed. A society still painted in moral black and white now fears the colour white itself. Addiction clinics begin to appear, though they offer little real treatment. Doctors prescribe rest, fresh air, and sometimes another drug to replace the first. Patients cycle between hope and relapse. The science of recovery doesn't yet exist. Only the language of shame does. Families hide their afflicted relatives. Newspapers call for punishment instead of care. Society, having built the habit, now demands confession. But the market does not die. It simply changes address. When the law begins to tighten, supply moves underground. Street dealers replace pharmacists. Whisper replaces advertisement. The product remains the same, a pinch of invincibility in powdered form. But now it's sold with secrecy instead of sunlight. What was once science has become sin again. You can almost hear the footsteps of history pacing in circles. Each time humanity discovers a new way to feel infinite, it quickly decides that someone else should be punished for believing it. The addict becomes a scapegoat for the age's ambition. Every overdose is framed as a morality tale. No one notices that the real addiction might belong to society itself. The addiction to control, to judgment, to the illusion of purity. By the early 1900s, cocaine has moved from the pharmacy to the front page, from the surgeon's toolkit to the courtroom. It's a short journey, only about 20 years, but it marks the transition from miracle to menace. The moralists have won the debate, at least on paper. In laboratories, researchers quietly turn to other projects, leaving behind a substance that will soon go underground. And yet, the hunger that created it, the need for speed, for relief, for something sharper than reality, remains untouched. When desire is criminalized, it doesn't vanish. It simply learns to whisper. In the distance, you can almost hear the next era assembling itself. The sound of typewriters in government offices, new regulations being drafted, new euphemisms being invented. Soon, the same powder will travel by other names, through other hands, under different lights. Progress, it turns out, has a remarkable talent for relapse. By the dawn of the 20th century, the miracle is officially worn off. The same governments that once encouraged modern science are now busy trying to erase its more embarrassing side effects. The solution, as always, is paperwork. Nothing restores moral order quite like a label, a ledger, and a tax. In 1906, the United States passes the Pure Food and Drugs Act, the first polite attempt to make honesty a legal requirement. From now on, medicine bottles must say what's inside them. It sounds simple, even noble, but honesty, like most reforms, arrives only after someone has profited from deceit. Across the country, pharmacists begin to redesign their bottles. The bright fonts promising vitality are replaced by small print warnings. May contain morphine, opium, or cocaine. It's the bureaucratic equivalent of guilt in parentheses. The effect is immediate. Middle-class customers read the labels, clear their throats, and quietly stop buying. The poor can't afford to stop. For them, the habit remains cheaper than a doctor. And so, a familiar pattern appears. The rich buy virtue, the poor buy relief. It's a pattern that will repeat for a century under different names and different substances, but always the same arithmetic. Pain divided by class. Still, the government wants to go further. Labels are a start, but morality demands enforcement. So in 1914, Congress introduces the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act, a law that looks like taxation, but feels like prohibition wearing a polite hat. Under its clauses, anyone handling opiates or coca products must register with the government and pay a tax. It sounds administrative, but the real purpose is to discourage the trade entirely. By making compliance expensive and confusing, the act effectively turns legitimate users into criminals through paperwork. The law doesn't ban cocaine outright. It simply buries it under so much red tape that it can no longer breathe. Doctors, suddenly anxious, stop prescribing. Pharmacists hesitate to stock it. The once bright bottles vanish from shelves as if they had never existed. In their place appear headache tonics with new, respectable names: Brain Salt, Vitaline, Calmos. Same bottles, different labels. You might say addiction learned to spell differently. The medical community retreats, but the market, predictably, does not. the demand remains, humming under the surface like a low fever. And where legitimate business withdraws, illegitimate business arrives on time. Street vendors appear near ports, in alleyways, and behind jazz clubs. The drug that once travelled in glass bottles now moves in paper envelopes and whispered passwords. The government has officially declared victory, which in most cases means the enemy has simply changed its uniform. You can picture the transformation. Pharmacies dimming their lamps at dusk while the alley across the street begins to glow. The same faces, the same hunger, just rearranged. Prohibition never eliminates temptation. It only teaches it to navigate better. The system congratulates itself for moral cleanliness while crime quietly learns logistics. The newspapers applaud the new regulations, printing headlines about national purity. Editorials praise the courage of reformers. A few skeptics note that the law mostly punishes the desperate rather than the deceitful. They're ignored. Public virtue loves a simple story, and nuance is bad for circulation. So the myth takes root, that the nation has defeated its chemical vices. People sleep better believing it, even if the night is now filled with the sound of footsteps exchanging envelopes. Meanwhile, Europe follows suit. Britain, France, and Germany pass similar laws, all couched in the same language of hygiene and order. They call it the defense of civilization, as if civilization were constantly one sniff away from collapse. In colonial territories, the same powers continue to profit from opium and coca exports, while condemning their use at home. Hypocrisy travels better than truth. It has fewer customs inspections. By the early 1920s, cocaine is no longer part of respectable medicine. It has been pushed into the underworld, a place it will make disturbingly comfortable. The medical journals stop publishing research. The scientists move on to safer molecules. Only law enforcement continues to study it, though their research methods involve more guns than microscopes. Still, the drug lingers like a ghost. In certain private clinics, wealthy patients continue to receive nerve tonics under quieter names. In rural towns, small pharmacies quietly sell off their remaining stock to trusted clients. And in cities, a new generation of musicians, actors, and night wanderers begin to find it again. They aren't reading the labels, they're rewriting them. For them, cocaine is not medicine or menace, it's a mood. A promise that the night might last a little longer, that exhaustion might wait its turn. History rarely notices this kind of transition because it happens in dim rooms and hushed conversations. But this is how prohibition always works, by driving desire underground, compressing it until it becomes more potent. A substance banned for purity will soon return disguised as glamour. The world doesn't give up its vices, it simply gives them better lighting. By the time the law congratulates itself on having won, the next era is already tuning its instruments. Somewhere in a smoky room, a saxophone will begin to play, a film projector will flicker, and a waiter will slip a folded packet into a famous hand. The nation has cleansed its shelves, but not its soul. Cocaine has been renamed, repackaged, and reassigned. It's no longer a tonic, it's an accessory. And the age of prohibition, like all Puritan dreams, has just invented the underworld it feared most. The year is 1923. The world has just survived a war and decided to reward itself with music. Cities hum again, trumpets, typewriters, cocktails, and a sense that tomorrow will arrive wearing sequins. Everyone is tired of death, tired of rules, and eager to believe that pleasure is progress. And in that mood, an old acquaintance quietly slips back into the room. Cocaine, freshly exiled from the pharmacy, has been reborn as entertainment. It starts in the clubs. In New Orleans, Chicago, Harlem, and Paris, musicians play until dawn, their instruments sweating under stage lights. The crowds want rhythm that doesn't rest, melodies that refuse to fade. Someone offers a pinch of white powder, a little courage for the next set, a little clarity for the next solo. The result is improvisation so sharp it feels supernatural. The papers call it the devil's tempo. but the players just call it keeping up. In the smoky corners of jazz clubs, small mirrors glint under the lights. A few grains vanish and the band plays faster. Cocaine gives them energy, confidence, and the dangerous illusion that exhaustion has been cancelled. It's not science anymore, it's rhythm in chemical form. You can almost hear the irony. The same powder that once numbed surgical patients now powers dance floors. Humanity, ever inventive, has turned anesthesia into adrenaline. Across the Atlantic, in Europe, the same song plays at a different tempo. Berlin, Paris, and London overflow with artists who mistake insomnia for inspiration. Writers chase deadlines. Painters chase clarity. Actors chase applause. Cocaine, conveniently, promises all three. It becomes the quiet co-star of the roaring 20s, always present, never credited. Everyone says they can quit whenever they like. Nobody does. In Hollywood, the new film industry shines brighter than daylight. Directors shout through megaphones, cameras clatter, and the world's first celebrities begin to discover that fame is its own kind of fatigue. They need to look perfect, feel perfect, act perfect. And perfection, like stardom, is exhausting. In studio dressing rooms, doctors prescribe pep tonics and mood powders. They come in small vials labelled with soothing words like remedy and refreshment. Inside is the same substance that once travelled through colonial minds and European laboratories. Now it hides behind mirrored compacts and gold cigarette cases. The film stars of the silent era live on tight schedules and tighter diets. They smile for hours, dance until their feet ache, then collapse into soft chairs with powder on the table. It helps them stay awake for scenes, smile through interviews, and survive the endless glare of camera lights. No one calls it addiction yet. They call it dedication. The audience never sees the difference. The 1920s are obsessed with speed. Automobiles race down new highways, telephones connect continents, and radio waves carry music through walls. The world is moving faster than it knows how to handle, and cocaine fits the decade perfectly. It's a drug for people who want to keep up with modernity itself, clean, efficient, and deceptively civilized. It promises control, but it delivers momentum, and momentum, as every physicist will tell you, doesn't stop just because you close your eyes. Behind the glamour, the price begins to show. Musicians collapse after all-night sessions. Actors disappear into health retreats. Newspapers whisper about nervous exhaustion, the polite phrase for everything no one wants to admit. Police raids catch small-time dealers, but the substance keeps moving through private clubs, hotel suites, and film sets. Like jazz itself, it adapts to every space. It's the improvisation of addiction, always finding a new key, a new rhythm, a new excuse. For the first time, organised crime takes notice. The American experiment with alcohol prohibition has created a network of smugglers, distributors, and businessmen with flexible ethics. If whiskey can make millionaires, why not this? Cocaine begins to appear in the ledgers of bootleg empires, hidden under code names like snow or Peruvian marching powder. Shipments cross borders disguised as medical goods. Pharmacists with creative handwriting make fortunes. The underworld, like any good entrepreneur, understands demand. The irony is hard to miss. A government that bans pleasure creates a market for crime. A culture that fears excess celebrates indulgence. And a public that condemns drugs still dances to songs written by musicians who can't sleep without them. Moral clarity, it seems, is the one product nobody can distribute evenly. By the end of the decade, the illusion begins to falter. The stock market crashes in 1929, taking with it the optimism of an entire generation. Nightclubs close, film studios go bankrupt, and the bright lights dim. The same world that celebrated endless motion suddenly stops, dazed and dizzy. And in that silence, the aftermath of cocaine feels louder than ever. What was once a social accessory now looks like a symptom. Doctors begin to write new articles about overstimulation and toxic fatigue. Society, as usual, rediscovers morality once it can no longer afford fun. The Jazz Age leaves behind two legacies, a soundtrack and a lesson. The soundtrack still plays, full of brass and heartbreak. The lesson is quieter. Every generation believes it can outdance consequence. But fatigue always finds the floor. When you picture the decade now, you think of saxophones, champagne, feathers, and film reels. But somewhere behind all that glitter was a tiny pile of white powder, making the whole party possible. It was the era's favourite lie, that control could be bought, bottled, or inhaled. The music, the movies, the headlines, all of them shimmered with borrowed energy. And when the decade finally ended, it wasn't just the economy that crashed. It was the illusion that humanity could stay awake forever. The party may have ended, but industry never sleeps. After the jazz fades and the champagne dries, a new rhythm takes over. Not music this time, but machinery. Factories hum, planes drone, and somewhere deep in South America, the next chapter of cocaine begins to take shape, humming along to the sound of generators in the jungle. The mid-20th century brings chemistry out of the parlour and into the warehouse. Gone are the glass bottles and velvet curtains. Now there are barrels, scales, and ledgers that smell of damp wood and gasoline. Cocaine no longer travels by rumour or fashion. It travels by ton. It starts in the Andes again, where the coca plant never stopped growing. Villagers still pick the leaves by hand, as their ancestors did, filling woven baskets under the hard sun. But this time, the buyers are not priests or merchants. They are men in pressed shirts with polite smiles, sent by companies with long names and even longer supply chains. They promise fair prices and quick payment. No one asks too many questions. That's how economies work when no one can afford morality. In remote sheds, the leaves are soaked in gasoline, pressed and drained. The process is simple, more alchemy than chemistry, a translation from green leaf to beige paste. The smell is sharp and sickly sweet, like burnt sugar mixed with fear. Workers stir the vats with wooden paddles, their hands wrapped in rags. No gloves, no masks, just endurance. They call it pasta basica, basic paste, the halfway form between nature and necessity. The paste travels by mule, by truck, by plane. Some ends up in legal pharmaceutical labs, most doesn't. In hidden workshops, chemists refine it further using acids, solvents, and prayer. The result is a powder that looks like purity itself. It isn't pure, of course. Nothing in this story ever is. But it's potent, portable, and profitable. They call it the hydrochloride form, which sounds like a scientific breakthrough, but really just means the version that lasts long enough to ruin lives on a schedule. By the 1950s, Chile becomes a quiet hub for this new chemistry. Government oversight is lax, and exports pass easily through respectable companies. But stability is not a permanent state. As the political winds shift, the trade shifts with it, northward to Colombia, where geography and corruption make an ideal alliance. There, amid rivers and rainforests, laboratories bloom like a new kind of agriculture. The jungle hums with life and engines. You can almost picture the scene: tin roofs, oil drums, plastic tubing, a radio playing faintly in the corner. The chemists are often self-taught, guided by rumour and repetition. The process is dangerous, but success smells like money, literally like solvent and currency mixing in the air. This is chemistry without conscience. It's not about curiosity anymore. It's about consistency. Each batch measured by yield, not purity. Each mistake punished not by failure, but by death. The men who run these operations are businessmen first, believers never. They speak the language of logistics, routes, volumes, bribes. A shipment leaves the jungle by night and reaches Miami by morning. It's faster than most mail. Politicians, police and pilots all play their part. Money blurs the lines between law and loyalty. One week's crackdown becomes next week's partnership. For every raid, there's a replacement. The trade doesn't stop, it simply evolves. When roads are blocked, airstrips appear. When airstrips are bombed, rivers become runways. Supply chains like vines always find the light. By the 1960s, the global market is ready. Wars have created flight routes. Peace has created boredom. In the United States, a generation disillusioned by politics looks for clarity and powder. In Europe, artists chase transcendence. In South America, governments balance budgets with bribes. Cocaine fits everywhere, in briefcases, guitars, and diplomatic pouches. It's the perfect export, weightless, timeless, and endlessly renewable. Somewhere along the way, a word changes meaning. Refinement, once a virtue, now becomes a crime. Purity, once a goal, becomes a marketing slogan. And distribution, that old bureaucratic term, becomes something people kill for. The irony is industrial. The same rational methods that built medicine now build cartels. The same chemistry that once promised liberation now ensures dependency on a scale so vast it could power nations. And in a sense, it does. Entire regions begin to orbit around the cocaine economy. Farmers, traffickers, smugglers, politicians. When a product is valuable enough, it creates its own gravity. The laboratories grow larger, more professional. No more oil drums in the jungle. Now there are compounds with walls, guards, and accountants. Airstrips lengthen. Planes become faster. Dealers start using small submarines built by naval engineers who once worked for governments. Every innovation humanity invents eventually ends up in service of its appetites. Cocaine becomes the quiet twin of modern progress. Invisible, efficient, and utterly immoral. And yet, beneath all the machinery and money, the story still begins with a leaf. Somewhere in the Andes, an old woman chews coca as she has done every morning of her life. It eases her breath, calms her hunger, and reminds her that work begins at sunrise. She doesn't know that the same plant now fuels wars thousands of miles away. She doesn't need to. History rarely asks permission before it repurposes devotion into supply. By the end of the century, the trade is unstoppable. Colombian cartels control entire ports. Airlines, banks, and politicians look the other way. Governments promise reform while quietly cashing the taxes of corruption. From the highlands of Bolivia to the nightclubs of New York, the same powder circulates through every class, every ideology, every lie about control. Because control is what the story has always been about. From the first miner's ration in Potosi, to the surgeon's vial in Vienna, to the mirrored tables of Hollywood, each era believed it could manage the substance, define its boundaries, keep its brilliance without its bite. And each time, the leaf taught the same lesson. Anything that gives energy will eventually demand it back. The music of the world has changed. Not jazz anymore, but engines, propellers, and the steady thump of profit measured in metric tons. Altitude is no longer required. The mountains have finally been replaced by machinery. The world enters the 1970s pretending not to notice what's happening in Colombia. It is easier that way. Officially, the country is exporting coffee and flowers. Unofficially, it has discovered a far more profitable crop. One that never wilts, never spoils, and always travels light. The city of Medellín sits in a valley that looks like it was carved for contradiction. Green hills, soft air, and the rising hum of a business that will soon be too big to hide. It begins quietly, as all empires do, with small groups of ambitious men who look at a forbidden product and see only logistics. They build laboratories in the jungle, hire pilots, pay soldiers, and call themselves entrepreneurs. Their leader, a man named Pablo Escobar, is not the devil of legend, but he will play the part with remarkable commitment. At first, he is charming. a local boy who buys football fields for children, builds houses for the poor, and hands out envelopes of cash during church festivals. The newspapers call him a philanthropist with unconventional income. But charity, when mixed with ambition, has a short half-life. Before long, Medellín becomes a city where kindness and terror live on the same street. Escobar's network grows faster than the government can invent excuses. Airplanes leave from clandestine strips at night, their bellies full of powder that smells faintly of gasoline and profit. By dawn, the cargo's over Miami, and by afternoon, it's already on Wall Street. The world's richest nation has found a new import, and its appetite is extraordinary. Money floods back south, so much that accountants have to weigh it instead of counting it. Every week, the valley glitters with new mansions, new cars, and new graves. Medellín becomes a paradox, a city where generosity buys silence and fear buys obedience. Escobar funds schools, hospitals, and churches. He poses for photos with priests and politicians. He hands out gifts to children, while the men who built his empire disappear into unmarked graves. He believes he can buy respect the way he buys airplanes, in bulk. And for a while, it works. To the poor, he is a Robin Hood. To the police, he is a paycheck. To the United States, he's an inconvenience they helped create. Because demand always writes the story, not supply. For every bag that leaves Colombia, there is a customer waiting somewhere with open hands and closed conscience. The American war on drugs, still in its infancy, will spend billions chasing what it continues to invite. Escobar understands this better than anyone. He doesn't fear the system, he studies it. He learns that politics can be bribed, justice can be delayed, and morality can be outsourced. The violence begins quietly, a few rivals shot, a few judges intimidated. Then the scale expands, car bombs in downtown Bogotá, assassinations broadcast on the evening news, journalists vanish, police stations explode. For the first time, an entire nation realizes that crime has gone beyond the street. It has entered the government schedule. When a state begins to fear its own paychecks, the empire is already inside the walls. At the height of his power, Escobar controls 80% of the world's cocaine trade. His fortune is so vast that he stores cash in barns and writes off the money eaten by rats as natural loss. He builds a private zoo, filled with animals imported from Africa, as if to remind the jungle who is in charge. He even offers to pay Colombia's national debt, a gesture both absurd and plausible. When money becomes myth, generosity becomes theatre. The irony is unbearable and perfect. A man who started as a smuggler ends up shaping international policy. His empire funds both charity and chaos. Whole neighbourhoods call him Don Pablo with reverence, while others whisper his name like a curse. In the global imagination, he becomes larger than life, the smiling face of terror, the tragic villain of an economic equation no one wants to solve. Meanwhile, in Miami, Los Angeles, and New York, cocaine consumption explodes, clubs overflow, parties stretch until morning, and newspapers call it the White Gold Rush. Executives and musicians share the same supplier chain. Cocaine becomes the scent of success, the perfume of the decade. Every snort echoes across borders, feeding a war they never see. In Medellín, the funerals keep pace with the exports. Every week, someone dies for another night's euphoria elsewhere. Escobar's paranoia grows as fast as his wealth. He builds fortresses, hides his money in the walls, and trusts no one. He wages open war against the government when extradition laws threaten him. Planes crash, politicians fall. Colombia becomes a battlefield fought with both bullets and briefcases. The citizens of Medellín learn to live with explosions the way others live with weather. But empires built on fear always forget one rule: fear is not loyal. As the pressure mounts, Escobar's allies splinter, his enemies multiply, and his city turns against him. The same government he once bought now hunts him. In 1993, after years of pursuit, he is cornered on a rooftop in his hometown. The firefight lasts minutes. When it ends, the world's most powerful drug lord lies dead beside a shattered satellite phone. He was 44. There is no grand victory speech, no moral resolution. The next morning, children gather around the police tape, curious rather than mournful. The newspapers print the photos and the cycle begins again. Shock, relief, and the quiet understanding that nothing fundamental has changed. Within months, other men move into the spaces he left behind. The trade continues, leaner and quieter. Like water, it always finds another channel. If you stand in Medellín today, you can still feel the echo, a strange mixture of pride, guilt, and exhaustion. The city has reinvented itself with art and education, trying to prove that beauty can outgrow terror. And perhaps it has. But beneath the murals and cable cars, the soil still remembers what money used to sound like when it fell from airplanes. Escobar once said he would rather die in Colombia than live in a US prison. He got his wish. The irony, of course, is that his death was treated as proof the war was working, even as production quietly doubled. The empire had fallen, but the economy of desire remained untouched. In a way, the world didn't defeat Escobar. It simply learned to operate without him. When an empire falls, the sound it makes is surprisingly quiet. There are no thunderclaps, no sudden silences. Just a slow rearranging of desks, a reshuffling of phone numbers, and the discreet clearing of throats among men who had been waiting for this moment. While Medellín burns itself into legend, another city begins to whisper. Cali, softer, tidier, and far better at paperwork. The men who run the Cali cartel don't want to be famous. They want to be invisible. They wear suits instead of gold chains, shake hands instead of firing guns, and hire accountants instead of soldiers. Their empire runs not on charisma but on spreadsheets. They call themselves the Gentlemen of Cali, which is both branding and camouflage. If Escobar's Medellín was a gunshot, Cali is a polite cough in a boardroom. They study the mistakes of their predecessor carefully. No open wars, no bombs, no interviews. Instead, they invest in banks, real estate, construction, even soccer clubs. They understand that legitimacy is not the opposite of crime. It is simply its best disguise. Money, after all, doesn't care what pocket it sleeps in. By the early 1990s, the Cali cartel controls the majority of global cocaine exports. Their supply chain runs like a corporation. Producers in the jungle, refiners in rural labs, distributors in major cities, and accountants making sure no decimal is left behind. They track their shipments as precisely as any international company. The only difference is that their quarterly reports are memorized, not printed. Where Escobar ruled through fear, Cali rules through efficiency. They prefer bribery to bullets. Why threaten a judge when you can simply pay for his children's education? Why bomb a police station when you can fund its new vehicles? They understand that corruption is cheaper than war and infinitely more sustainable. Terrorism draws headlines, accounting does not. Their power grows quietly. Politicians attend their parties. Businessmen attend their churches. Even international agencies struggle to tell where law ends and partnership begins. When journalists try to investigate, they are politely invited to write about something else, often with a generous donation attached. The result is peace, or at least the kind that can be purchased monthly. Meanwhile, demand continues to rise in the north. In the United States, cocaine is still the unofficial fuel of success. It glitters in nightclubs and boardrooms alike. The language changes. No one calls it addiction anymore. They call it lifestyle. Every generation invents new euphemisms for the same old dependencies. The Cali cartel becomes a multinational empire. Its members travel with diplomatic calm, speaking in the language of investment and philanthropy. They sponsor local charities, build schools, even fund police programs designed to fight drugs. It is the kind of irony that history applauds quietly. When morality becomes good marketing, you can sell anything, even virtue. But the calm cannot last forever. The United States, embarrassed by years of chaos in Colombia, begins to focus on a new kind of warfare: intelligence and infiltration. Satellite images replace soldiers, surveillance replaces statements. By the mid-90s, the DEA and Colombian police coordinate a series of operations to dismantle Cali's structure. This time, there are no rooftop chases or fiery shootouts, just quiet arrests in office towers and suburban mansions. Each arrest looks like a business meeting ending slightly ahead of schedule. The newspapers call it the triumph of law. But the victory feels suspiciously familiar, temporary, convenient and profitable. Within months, smaller organisations fill the gap, decentralising the trade until no one can tell where it starts or ends. Cali falls, but its business model survives. Corporate crime, after all, is harder to kill than corporate culture. As the 90s progress, a new generation of traffickers emerges, less theatrical, more global. They build alliances with Mexican transport networks, European investors, and even old guerrilla groups. The trade becomes too diversified to destroy. When one route is cut, another opens. When one leader falls, another already owns the map. It's the invisible hand of the market, only with actual hands. Inside Colombia, citizens grow weary. They've seen charity disguised as terror and progress disguised as corruption. They begin to realise that the war on drugs is less about stopping trade and more about deciding who controls it. Governments change, slogans repeat. The only consistent truth is that cocaine continues to move. Invisible, odourless, adaptable. A perfect mirror of the global economy it serves. You can almost hear the hum of its machinery, the sound of trucks on highways, the click of briefcases, the whisper of bills being counted in darkened offices. The trade has outgrown borders and ideologies. It no longer needs warlords. It has managers. It doesn't need revolutions. It has regulations to bypass. It doesn't even need secrecy. It just needs complexity. And complexity, like power, hides best in plain sight. For the citizens who once lived under Escobar's bombs, the quiet feels like peace. But peace built on silence is just a different kind of noise. The streets are calmer, but the money still flows in the same direction. It passes through banks that sponsor civic projects and charities that print polite annual reports. If you follow the paper trail far enough, it eventually loops back to the same valleys where the coca leaves grow, as if history is determined to run in circles until it feels dizzy enough to stop asking why. In the end, the Cali cartel doesn't fall because it was defeated. It falls because it finished the job. It proved that crime doesn't need chaos, only organisation, and once that lesson is learned, it can never be unlearned. Governments, corporations and cartels now share the same vocabulary: distribution, diversification, market share. You could almost call it globalization, except the globe keeps spinning on borrowed adrenaline. By the late 90s, the world is preparing to name a new villain. The names will change, the accents will shift, and the headlines will move north. Mexico is next, though no one knows it yet. The handover will be smooth, quiet, and largely invisible. Just another merger in the long career of human appetite. The 80s arrive wearing shoulder pads and self-confidence. The world has money again, or at least the illusion of it. Neon lights glow, business suits multiply, and ambition becomes a national pastime. The economy hums, the stock market dances, and cocaine, that familiar glittering ghost, returns to the stage as the decade's unofficial anthem. But this time, it's about to change shape, tone, and meaning. In the beginning, cocaine is still considered elegant. White powder on glass tables, whispered exchanges at parties, and discreet lines drawn with gold cards. It belongs to the wealthy, to the restless, to those who mistake energy for success. Wall Street runs on adrenaline and powdered confidence. Executives make deals faster, talk louder, sleep less. The 80s are allergic to moderation. Everything must expand. Wealth, ego, and the quiet addiction hiding inside both. Then chemistry intervenes again, though not in a laboratory this time, but in a kitchen. Somewhere in Los Angeles, dealers discover that by heating cocaine powder with baking soda and water, they can create small rocks that produce an immediate, intense high when smoked. It's not a new substance, just a new form. Cocaine reborn as crack, cheaper and far more efficient at devastation. What began as luxury suddenly becomes accessible. The drug of boardrooms descends into back streets, and the economy of pleasure discovers a lower class. The first wave hits poor neighbourhoods already struggling with unemployment and neglect. The high is fast, euphoric, and mercilessly brief. People chase it until there's nothing left to chase with. Families fracture, crime rises, and an entire generation is written off as a moral lesson. Politicians declare a war on drugs, which, like most wars, is easier to start than to understand. Television cameras arrive early and stay too long. They film the same street corners again and again, showing the same desperate faces under flickering streetlights. The images sell fear. The headlines sell copies. A new phrase enters the American vocabulary: crack epidemic. The subtext is clear. Addiction has changed colour and address. Suddenly, what was once called recreation becomes corruption. The problem hasn't grown, only the empathy has shrunk. Congress responds the way it always does, with paperwork and punishment. In 1986, new sentencing laws create a stunning imbalance. Possessing 1 ounce of crack is punished as harshly as possessing 100 ounces of powdered cocaine. Chemically, they are nearly identical. Socially, they are worlds apart. The law doesn't measure molecules, it measures neighbourhoods. For the next 30 years, prisons will fill with people who had less money but the same addiction. Justice, in its eagerness to appear decisive, forgets its own chemistry. Meanwhile, cocaine's upper-class image refuses to die. Magazines call it the champagne of drugs. Musicians sing about it in metaphors too thin to disguise. Films glamorize the thrill, the energy, the arrogance. The same culture that mourns crack users applauds cocaine users, as if poverty were the real crime. It's an age of contradiction wrapped in a mirror. Everything sparkles, even hypocrisy. Behind the scenes, the cartels adapt quickly. They flood the market with cheap product, expanding territory, cutting, purity, maximizing reach. A single shipment can fund a small war. Small-time dealers, many barely out of childhood, become both entrepreneurs and casualties. Neighborhoods transform into battlefields, where loyalty costs less than ammunition. Police raids multiply, prisons overflow, and television anchors report moral victory each night as statistics rise behind them. The war on drugs, it turns out, is an efficient form of job creation. In Washington, politicians pose with seized bricks of cocaine on camera, holding them like trophies. Each speech promises to end this scourge once and for all. Each election cycle resets the countdown. The factories of despair stay open 24 hours a day. Every budget increase means another generation to save or punish or forget. Somewhere inside all this noise, individuals still struggle in silence. Addicts write letters to their families from prison. Mothers bury children and wait for apologies that never come. Doctors try to study the phenomenon, but research funding goes to enforcement, not understanding. Public sympathy hardens into policy. It's easier to wage war than to offer care. The tragedy of the crack era is not just chemical, it's cultural. A society addicted to speed, economic, social, moral, finds in crack its own reflection. Short, powerful, self-destructive. Every hit feels like progress until it doesn't. And when the high fades, the blame begins. In the music of the decade, you can hear both the euphoria and the exhaustion. Bass lines thump like heartbeats, synths shimmer like promises, and behind it all, the quiet rasp of cities losing sleep. Cocaine and crack together form the decade's twin pulse, one loud, one broken. Each rhythm feeds the other. The rich demand purity, the poor buy what's left. The supply chain becomes a mirror of inequality, polished to a blinding shine. By the end of the 80s, America is ready to claim victory again. Drug arrests hit record numbers, incarceration becomes a growth industry, and politicians pat themselves on the back for saving civilization. But numbers have a strange sense of irony. The same year the government celebrates a decline in use, the cartels celebrate record profits. The system has learned how to feed on the very thing it condemns. As long as there is fear, there is funding. As long as there is demand, there is supply. And between those two truths stands the addict, a human being reduced to evidence. If you listen closely, you can still hear the hum of the decade, the muffled sound of ambition grinding against reality. Behind every glittering skyline lies a shadow shaped like smoke. The 80s end with gold watches, prison gates, and a hangover measured not in grams but in grief. Cocaine's story has never really been about chemistry. It's about repetition, humanity's favourite formula for forgetting. The new millennium arrives with optimism printed on glossy paper. Politicians in Washington and Bogota shake hands under bright lights, promising to win a war that has already changed shape too many times to count. They call it Plan Colombia, a phrase that sounds like urban renewal, though its real targets are green and growing. The plan will spray the sky, flood the forest, and pour billions into a battle that insists it can make a plant surrender. In theory, the idea is simple. If you destroy the coca fields, the cocaine trade will vanish. If you fund the right soldiers, justice will grow in its place. Reality, as usual, disagrees. From above, small planes drift low over the jungle, releasing silver clouds meant to kill leaves but not poverty. The chemicals spread, the plants wither, and the rivers carry the residue into the soil. Farmers step outside their huts, coughing, watching their crops, not just coca but corn and cassava, turn the colour of ash. They pack their families and move deeper into the forest, clearing new land because hunger doesn't recognise international strategy. You press the balloon and the air just moves. The official reports call this progress. Graphs rise and fall in government offices while on the ground the mountains remain indifferent. For every hectare sprayed, another sprouts just beyond the border where the planes can't reach. Satellite images show success on paper. Satellite images also miss the tents where families now sleep without roofs. The diplomats hold press conferences. The jungle, patient as always, keeps growing back. The plan includes more than chemicals. Money flows into paramilitary groups, local militias dressed in national colours, trained to protect the war effort. They do, in their own way, burning villages accused of harbouring growers, escorting shipments that fund both sides, and quietly settling old feuds under the banner of patriotism. The countryside becomes a chessboard, and the pawns, as usual, are human. In the capital, the government celebrates diplomatic triumphs. The president smiles beside visiting dignitaries. There are photo ops with helicopters, new training camps, and promises of victory. To donors, the war looks efficient. To citizens, it looks endless. The difference depends entirely on where you stand. Farmers in the southern departments are offered crop substitution programs. They're told to grow coffee or cacao instead of coca, as if global markets could be switched as easily as seeds. But when the trucks stop coming, when no one buys their legal harvest, the same fields quietly return to what grows fastest. Coca, after all, doesn't ask for infrastructure. It just needs desperation. You can't replant hope with the same tools used to erase it. International observers visit occasionally. They wear helmets and optimism, take photos beside soldiers, and issue statements about stability. At night, local journalists whisper that the same helicopters dropping herbicide also ferry shipments north. No one writes that part down. The ink dries too quickly in the heat. The war's language becomes a kind of poetry. Eradication, interdiction, supply reduction. Each term sounds clean, bureaucratic, safe for speeches. On the ground, they mean burned homes, missing sons, and empty markets. One report boasts that 10,000 hectares have been cleared. Another notes that coca cultivation has shifted neatly into Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. Victory by displacement. The balloon has been pressed again, and the air has obediently moved. To the rest of the world, Plan Colombia becomes a symbol of partnership. Foreign leaders praise it as a success story. Aid continues to flow. A decade later, economists will call it the model for future interventions. That phrase will age as well as all such optimism does. Printed, quoted, then quietly ignored. For the people living under the flight paths, the war is less elegant. It sounds like engines at dawn and feels like rain that burns. Children learn to tell the difference between thunder and helicopters. Old women collect leaves from dead trees and show them to visiting officials, asking if these were the criminals the planes were meant to kill. No one answers. Policy rarely speaks local languages. By the mid-2000s, coca production statistics begin to climb again. There are more soldiers, more planes, more dollars, and the same result. The war has achieved motion, not progress. It is a treadmill powered by its own funding. Every success story comes with a footnote explaining why the numbers still rise. Every promise of peace is postponed until next quarter, and every report ends the same way. Further study required. You can almost admire the symmetry of it all. Each side keeps the other alive. The traffickers need the crackdown to justify higher prices. The crackdown needs the traffickers to justify its budget. Somewhere between them lies a single farmer, chewing a leaf just to stay awake through another day of someone else's strategy. At night, the jungle breathes. The stars above look no different from the ones that watched the Inca chew their sacred leaves centuries ago. Only the noise has changed. The hum of engines replacing prayer, the mist of chemicals replacing incense. If the mountain could speak, it might say nothing at all. It has seen empires declare victory before. Plan Colombia will eventually be hailed as a geopolitical success, credited with reducing violence and stabilizing a region. But statistics are a fragile kind of truth. For every percentage point of progress, there is a village erased from the map, a family displaced to nowhere, a forest still smouldering. History will call it a turning point. The people who lived through it will call it a season that never ended. In the quiet between flights, the jungle starts to recover. Small shoots push through the ash. A few farmers return, plant again, and wait. The leaf, patient and green, has outlasted every empire so far, and somewhere in an office thousands of miles away, another official signs another extension of the same plan, still chasing the same ghost through the same smoke. The story drifts north again, as it always does, following the scent of profit and possibility. When Colombia becomes too dangerous for business, the trade doesn't die. It migrates. Every river finds a new path. This one flows through Mexico. At first, Mexico is only a courier, a middleman carrying someone else's empire across its borders. Cocaine moves north by truck, by plane, by the occasional fishing boat that never returns to fishing. But couriers, when paid in product instead of cash, learn quickly. One shipment becomes 10. The middleman becomes the owner. And before long, the map of Latin America has redrawn itself in invisible ink. Two major syndicates rise from the dust. One built on family loyalty, the other on pure violence. The first calls itself Sinaloa, after the western state where it was born. The second, Los Zetas, grows from fragments of elite military units who trade uniforms for profit. One prefers negotiation, the other prefers terror. Together, they turn Mexico into a case study in organized chaos. By the late 1990s, the trade routes are fully industrialized. Highways hum with convoys, airstrips glitter under moonlight. The same trucks that carry vegetables north carry something a little more profitable under the floorboards. Customs agents look the other way. not because they're blind, but because salaries are smaller than bribes. The border stretches for thousands of kilometres, a line drawn in sand and maintained in theory. Local economies adapt, as they always do. Entire towns depend on cartel money. Shops stay open because someone's cousin runs shipments. Churches are renovated with anonymous donations. Children grow up knowing which streets belong to which people, which cars to avoid, which silences mean survival. Corruption isn't an exception. It's the climate. Everyone breathes it, whether they want to or not. The government declares its own war in 2006. Thousands of soldiers march, armoured vehicles patrol, and politicians speak of cleansing and renewal. They call it a fight for the soul of the nation. It sounds noble until the bodies start to appear. Mass graves on the outskirts of towns, bullet-riddled trucks smouldering beside highways. Every success announced at noon is undone by nightfall. Each raid produces new vacancies, and vacancies in this business never stay open for long. Cities become stages for conflicts that resemble civil wars, but lack the courtesy of ideology. Juarez, once a border town, becomes a headline. Reynosa, Tijuana, Culiacan. Their names shift from geography to warning. The news counts deaths like weather reports. Numbers climb, flatten, climb again. Some journalists keep score, others vanish. The cartels evolve faster than the state. They buy encryption technology, hire hackers, employ accountants, even recruit chemists to improve production. They move their earnings through banks, casinos, and shell companies, transforming dirty cash into dividends. At the same time, they cultivate their own mythology, ballads, murals, saints of protection. In poor regions, the line between criminal and provider blurs until it's mostly rumour. When the government fails to build roads, the cartel builds them. When the police vanish, the cartel becomes law. When the state abdicates, the market governs. One October afternoon in 2019, the city of Culiacan experiences the full measure of that reality. Federal forces arrest Ovidio Guzman, the son of Sinaloa's imprisoned leader. Within minutes, hundreds of gunmen flood the streets. They block roads with burning trucks, surround military bases, and hold civilians hostage until the government retreats. By nightfall, the army releases the prisoner to prevent more deaths. The nation watches in silence as power shifts in real time. For one afternoon, the cartel is the state, and the state is the spectator. The irony is too heavy to lift. The war on drugs has not failed. It has diversified. Every crackdown redistributes wealth and power like a corporate restructuring. New groups emerge, splinter, merge again. Some specialize in production, others in transport, others in public relations. Each region runs its own franchise of the same despair. Mexico, once a corridor, is now the crossroads. The violence seeps into everything. Music, fashion, conversation. Children play games pretending to be soldiers or smugglers. It's hard to tell which side they think wins. Television shows glamorize the trade with slow-motion gunfights and tragic anti-heroes. Meanwhile, real families sleep in basements when the gunfire starts. The culture learns to live with fear, the way coastal towns live with storms. Everyone pretends the next one will miss them. Politicians change, speeches recycle, but the rhythm remains the same. Each new president promises to end the bloodshed. Each inherits a deeper ledger of the dead. Billions in foreign aid flow through programs with hopeful acronyms, funding training, patrols, and new technology. But money cannot reform a wound, it also feeds. For every corrupt official arrested, 2 more learn how to hide better. For every lab destroyed, another relocates a few valleys away. The air moves again. The night skyline of Mexican cities glows faintly orange. Sometimes it's neon, sometimes it's fire. In the distance you can see a truck burning on the highway, confiscated, then reclaimed. The flames lick the metal like a confession that refuses to be written down. The sound is strangely soft, almost peaceful, as if the city itself were exhaling. A few hours later, another convoy will replace it, because the market dislikes interruptions. And through it all, the coca leaves keep growing in the Andes, patient and oblivious. Their journey is now global, their meaning long since replaced by mathematics. They no longer carry prayers, they carry invoices. Somewhere a politician signs a treaty, and somewhere else a mother counts bullet holes in her wall. Both actions, in their own way, keep the system moving. By the time dawn rises over Culiacán, the fires have burned out, the trucks are cold, and the news cycle is ready for the next headline. The city smells of smoke and diesel. Children walk to school past blackened cars as if it were just another Tuesday. No one is shocked. They have learned that survival is a form of adaptation. Mexico, like the leaf it carries north, has learned to endure every climate, including corruption. The leaf's journey no longer belongs to a continent. It belongs to the world now. By the 21st century, cocaine has become what every empire once dreamed of being: borderless, adaptable, and fluent in every language that money speaks. Its path loops across oceans and airports, through container yards and private jets, touching every nation that pretends it doesn't. The story begins again along the Atlantic, on the coast of West Africa. Here, in places like Guinea-Bissau and Sierra Leone, small fishing towns suddenly bloom with luxury cars and satellite dishes. The locals joke that the sea must be giving better fish these days. In truth, it's the boats. Ships leave South America loaded with cargo labelled frozen fruit or timber, make brief stops in these quiet ports, and continue toward Europe. The officials at customs nod, stamp, and look away. Sometimes they are paid to, sometimes they are simply tired. The trade adapts to geography. West Africa becomes the new hinge between supply and demand. The equator's shortcut. Traffickers call it the silent route, though its silence is mostly bought. Along the docks, cranes swing containers that hum like beehives, each one carrying enough powder to fund a government or a revolution, depending on which arrives first. Across the Mediterranean, Europe waits with open hands. Southern ports in Spain and Italy become gateways for a commerce that never officially arrives. In the Italian region of Calabria, the 'Ndrangheta, a crime family that once smuggled olives and cigarettes, now manages most of the continent's cocaine imports. They control shipping terminals, customs contracts, and the quiet loyalty of men in suits who never touch the product but always touch the paperwork. The family meetings take place in vineyards and baptism parties, where no one speaks directly but everyone understands. Further north, in Rotterdam and Antwerp, the trade becomes mechanical. Containers stack higher than church spires. Each ship holds thousands, and inspecting them all would take centuries. Officials do random searches, more for theatre than control. Cocaine hides in shipments of bananas, coffee, even rubber ducks. The irony writes itself. A substance born in sacred rituals now travels disguised as children's toys. Behind these ports, new brokers emerge. Balkan groups handle logistics, Dutch-Moroccan chemists oversee purity, and London financiers handle the laundering. Cocaine has become an ecosystem, not a substance. It sustains everyone from small farmers to billion-dollar hedge funds. Every link in the chain insists it's only a middleman. No one feels responsible, because responsibility doesn't pay interest. The geography of the trade has turned into choreography. Flights from Sao Paulo to Lisbon, ships from Cartagena to Cotonou, couriers swallowing capsules before boarding first-class seats. Each movement is timed, rehearsed, and astonishingly ordinary. Globalization turns smuggling into just another form of shipping. Same logistics, better margins. In the airports of Paris and Madrid, security scanners hum while officials sip coffee and discuss reforms. Every so often a passenger is caught, and the papers announce major bust. The numbers sound impressive, 10 kilograms, 50 kilograms, 100. But a single cargo ship carries thousands. It's like celebrating a drought because you caught one raindrop. Meanwhile, demand keeps climbing quietly. Cocaine no longer belongs to any one class. It moves from bankers to students, from festival tents to suburban kitchens. It's not rebellion anymore, it's routine. The same dust once used for prayers now sits in nightclub restrooms, under fluorescent lights that make everyone look both alive and exhausted. Globalization has no conscience, only logistics. For those who manage the routes, the work feels almost respectable. They study maps, weather patterns, and currency exchange rates. Their spreadsheets look identical to those of shipping companies or airlines. One broker in Spain reportedly said, "We don't deal drugs, we deal efficiency." He wasn't wrong. The border between commerce and crime has thinned to a hairline. All that separates a CEO from a cartel leader is punctuation. Every port has its own ecosystem of invisibility. Truck drivers who ask no questions, warehouse managers who never check seals, bankers who specialize in forgetting. Money moves through offshore accounts like water through sand. The sums are so large they distort economies. Housing prices, elections, charities. The drug no longer hides, it invests. And yet, behind the statistics, the same pattern remains. For every luxurious penthouse built from the profits, there is a small house in the Andes where another farmer plants coca because nothing else will grow. For every European club where music thunders until dawn, there is a jungle stream carrying waste from a processing lab into the river. Each high leaves its fingerprints somewhere else. It's just that the fingerprints rarely match. Europe congratulates itself on sophistication. Latin America mourns quietly. Africa looks away, unsure which side of the balance it belongs to. The trade unites them all, not in policy but in dependency. The modern world, for all its technology and progress, still runs partly on dust. In a way, cocaine has become the perfect symbol of the age. White, weightless, and relentlessly mobile. It doesn't believe in nations or ideologies. It just moves where opportunity smells richest. If history were a chemical reaction, this would be equilibrium. The moment when every boundary dissolves and all that remains is motion. By the time you finish tracing its roots, the map looks less like geography and more like a circulatory system. Ports as lungs, roads as veins, airports as beating hearts. The planet, in its own strange way, is breathing the same substance, a stimulant that keeps civilization awake when it should probably be resting. And in that restless hum of cranes, engines, and nightclub bass, you can almost hear a question forming beneath the noise. If this is progress, why does it still sound so tired? The story always circles back to the same leaf. Even now in laboratories and nightclubs, on dance floors and border checkpoints, its echo remains. A soft green ghost still wandering between mountains and cities. But what began as a sacred breath has now mixed with something colder, faster, and deadlier. The latest chapter of cocaine is not about euphoria anymore, it's about survival. In recent years, a new shadow has entered the supply chain, fentanyl, a synthetic sedative so potent that a few specks can quiet a heartbeat before a sentence finishes. At first, it drifted in from the opioid crisis, from counterfeit painkillers and forgotten prescriptions. Then someone, somewhere, decided to stretch the cocaine supply by adding a trace of it. Maybe to intensify the rush, maybe just to cut costs. The chemistry doesn't care about reasons, it simply reacts. Now, overdose scenes blur categories. Users think they're taking a stimulant. Their hearts stop as if they'd taken a sleeping draft meant for giants. Paramedics find bodies with mixed signals. Lungs slow, pupils wide, hope expired mid-heartbeat. In clubs, ambulances wait outside like unwanted chaperones. On screens, cities count deaths by the week, but numbers have lost their urgency. The crisis has become a metronome, steady, familiar, and too slow for alarm. The irony is unbearable. A drug once sold for wakefulness now causes people to never wake again. Doctors warn, governments issue statements, and the market, as always, adjusts. Dealers start carrying test strips and training videos, as if safety instructions could civilize poison. The war on drugs, having lasted a century, has reached its quietest stage, everyone pretending to be responsible while the chemistry keeps rearranging itself in the dark. Far from the sirens and neon lights, the other half of the story unfolds, not in hospitals, but in forests. In the Amazon and its tributaries, the air smells of gasoline and burnt leaves. Deforestation maps look like veins of infection spreading from the Andes outward. The coca plant itself isn't to blame. It grows modestly, almost politely. But the processing, the endless need to extract and refine, leaves scars. Toxic runoff bleeds into rivers where children once swam. Wildlife vanishes quietly, replaced by silence and smoke. To hide the laboratories, traffickers clear more land, and to escape eradication, farmers move deeper into untouched jungle. The cycle feeds on its own cure. Helicopters still pass overhead, spraying, filming, assuring their funders that something is being done. But on the ground, the forest feels thinner each year, as if it too were tired of holding its breath. In a way, this has always been the true cost of the high, not the brief thrill in human veins, but the permanent exhaustion of the earth that sustains them. And yet, in the high plains of Bolivia, a gentler story persists. Here, coca is still chewed the way it has been for thousands of years. Elders sit outside in the morning sun, leaves pressed into their cheeks, the rhythm of their breathing matching the rhythm of the wind. They know about the global trade, of course. They watch the news, shake their heads, and keep chewing. For them, the leaf was never a sin or a scandal. It was food for the spirit, a way to speak with the mountain without shouting. When international treaties tried to ban even this ancient ritual, Bolivia protested. It argued that culture is not contraband. Eventually, the world relented, allowing coca chewing under cultural exemption. A small victory, but one that matters, a reminder that not everything sacred must be burned to prove purity. Elsewhere, the line between legal and lethal grows thinner. Pharmaceutical companies produce medical cocaine under strict supervision. Hospitals still use it occasionally in surgeries, a ghost of its former respectability. Meanwhile, the illegal trade now includes substances that didn't exist when the war began. Synthetic cathinones, designer opioids, powders with names that sound like software updates. Human curiosity never stops inventing new mistakes. In cities, the language around addiction changes again. Politicians start speaking about harm reduction, treatment access, public health. The words sound compassionate, almost musical, but they arrive decades late. Millions have already paid for the lesson in silence. Communities once called criminal are now called victims. The difference, as always, is timing. The global market shows no remorse. Trafficking routes extend into Asia, Oceania, and the Arctic Circle. Cargo ships glide through polar seas carrying containers marked with nothing but codes and plausible deniability. Every nation has become both importer and exporter, of goods, of guilt, of denial. Cocaine has ceased to be a scandal. It's a statistic. And statistics are how civilization sleeps at night. Still, the world occasionally looks up from its numbers. Environmental groups release photos of brown rivers, bare slopes, and smoke rising from the green heart of the continent. Politicians frown, scientists write, activists march. But the machines keep working, and the silence keeps spreading. Every high still leaves a crater somewhere else, in a body, a forest, a family, or a faith. If you listen carefully, you can still hear the first leaf rustling on an Andean hillside. It has outlived empires, doctors, and dictators. It has been worshipped, condemned, powdered, outlawed, and still it grows. Green, persistent, patient. Humanity has turned it into a mirror, reflecting every contradiction it refuses to face. The hunger for energy, the fear of stillness, the belief that control is the same thing as peace. In the end, the story doesn't close with punishment or redemption, but with fatigue. A century of war, and the leaf is still winning by simply existing. The mountains keep breathing. The rivers keep carrying secrets downstream. The cities keep pretending they don't know where the light comes from. And somewhere, in a nightclub or a jungle clearing, another hand lifts a line of white dust toward the promise of relief that never lasts. The world has inhaled a leaf's ghost and called it progress, and maybe that's what history really is. The longest high, followed by a silence we still haven't learned to sit through.